The mic felt heavier than I expected it to be. My palms were already sweating, even though I hadn't said a single word yet. Around me, hundreds of people sat at those fancy round tables with white linens, their forks pausing mid-bite as the DJ announced my name. Franklin Hargrove, father of the groom. That was me. I'd practiced this moment 100 times in the car ride over, my wife Catherine sitting beside me, squeezing my hand for courage. Just keep it short, I told myself. A few words about how proud you are. Maybe a joke. Nothing that'd make your son uncomfortable. That was the goal. Don't embarrass Logan in front of all these city people he's always trying to impress. What I didn't know was that embarrassment was already coming. Just not the kind I was expecting. I stood up from my chair, adjusted the rented suit that still didn't quite fit right at the shoulders, and walked toward the stage. The ballroom was beautiful. I won't deny that. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, white roses sat in tall arrangements on every table, and the marble floor was so polished I could see my reflection as I walked. This wasn't my world. I knew that. But Catherine had wrapped homemade cookies in a ribbon that morning, and I'd rented this suit, and I was here to support my son on his wedding day. That should have counted for something. I climbed the 3 small steps to the stage, my shoes clicking against the polished wood. The crowd quieted down. Cameras came out. Everyone was waiting. And that's when I looked over at Logan, sitting at the head table with his new bride Amanda. He gave me a tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and gave me a small nod like a coach signaling a player to take the field. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We want to give a warm welcome to the entire family tuning in. Kick back, get comfortable because this story, trust me, it gets heavy. I brought the microphone up to my mouth. My voice came out steady enough, even though my heart was racing. Good evening, everyone. I'm Franklin, Logan's father. I may not be. That's when I heard it. Dad, it's okay, you don't need to talk. We don't want to bore them with small-town stories. His voice cut through mine like a knife through paper. Not quiet. Not under his breath. Loud. Clear. In front of all these strangers. The whole room heard it. Some of the guests actually laughed, like it was a joke. Like my own son had just made a funny observation about his old man. I froze. My hand holding the mic went cold. Logan leaned back in his chair, one arm draped around Amanda, that same tight smile still plastered on his face. Then he added it, the final blow, his voice thick with mock sympathy. My dad's simple. He's from the old days. We're a bit more modern now. He looked at Amanda, and she laughed. A real laugh. Like she'd just married into something better. The room erupted. Not angry. Amused. Entertained. My son had just roasted his own father at his own wedding, and everyone was eating it up like it was the highlight of the evening. I stood there on that stage, microphone still in my hand, feeling about 2 feet tall. Catherine's face went white. I could see her from where I was standing, her hand covering her mouth like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But here's the thing nobody knew in that moment, the thing that made me slowly lower that microphone and smile instead of shout. I already knew the truth about Logan's success. And that truth was about to change everything. I stepped off that stage, walked back to my seat, and sat down next to my wife. She reached for my hand, her eyes full of tears and questions. I squeezed her fingers once and whispered, "It's okay. He just doesn't know what's coming." My childhood didn't have much in the way of money, but it had something most kids don't get these days. It had work. Real work. The kind that teaches you who you are before anyone else gets the chance to tell you. My parents owned a small farm outside a town so tiny that the only thing it was known for was being between bigger towns. We grew corn mostly, some soybeans, and my dad kept a few cattle just for milk and beef. There was no machinery like farmers have now, It was my dad's hands and my mom's hands and eventually my hands, turning dirt into food. Sweat was the family currency. You didn't talk about how hard you worked, you just showed up at 5 in the morning and did it anyway. My dad used to say that money was like water, it flowed toward you if you had the right shape to catch it. But character was like stone. It didn't flow anywhere. It stayed put. It held up what you built on top of it. I was maybe 8 when he told me that, and I didn't understand it fully until much later. But I understood one thing. He wasn't going to be rich, and that was fine by him. When I was old enough to work outside of farm chores, I started helping a construction company that came through our county doing small jobs. I was maybe 16, learning how to frame walls and pour concrete. By the time I was 25, I had my own small operation. Nothing fancy. I did residential work, building homes for families who needed real houses built by hands that knew what they were doing. Not mansions. Not investment properties. Houses where kids would grow up and where people would celebrate holidays and where life would happen. My wife Catherine came into my life during those early years. I met her at a church function when I was 23, and she was helping serve food in the basement. She had dark hair back then, and the kind of smile that made you think maybe there was more to life than just work. She was patient in a way that most people aren't. She understood without me having to explain that I came from nothing and I was going to build something honest, even if it was small. When Logan was born, Catherine placed him in my arms in that hospital room, and I made a promise to myself that went beyond words. This boy, my boy, he was never going to know the kind of struggle I knew. He wasn't going to lie awake at night worrying about money. He wasn't going to wear his older brother's hand-me-downs because there was nothing else. He was going to have every chance I didn't have, and I was going to work my hands to the bone to make sure of it. By the time Logan was 6, we'd built a life that wasn't wealthy but was comfortable. We had a house I'd built myself on weekends. Catherine had a vegetable garden. And Logan had everything a kid could want, a place to run, parents who loved him, and a father who came home with calluses but also with pride. That was the Logan I knew. The one who'd climb up on my shoulders to see fireworks over the town square on the 4th of July. The one who'd fall asleep in my truck during long job site days. The one who'd laugh at my terrible jokes and think his old man was the strongest person in the world. I didn't know yet that time would change him. But I was about to find out just how much. The city changed Logan the way saltwater changes cast iron. Slow at first, then all at once. He was 16 when he told me he wanted to move there after high school. Got some opportunity with a business mentorship program. I was proud. My son was ambitious. Catherine worried, she always does, but I told her this was good. This was the dream we'd been saving for him to have. So I sold my truck. The same Ford I'd used on construction sites for 12 years, the one with the dent on the passenger side from when Logan backed into it learning to drive. I sold it to help with his down payment on that fancy apartment lease near the city center. The first few months, he called every Friday night at 6 o'clock. We'd talk for an hour, him telling us about his new friends, his business ideas, his plans to make it big. Catherine would sit beside me with the phone on speaker, and we'd listen to our son go on about marketing and branding and something called personal growth. It was exciting to hear him so fired up about life. Like we'd done something right. But then the calls started coming later. 9 o'clock instead of 6. Then they became texts. Can't call tonight, Dad. Big client meeting tomorrow. Then the texts became shorter. Then they became nothing at all. When he finally came home to visit a year after he'd moved, I barely recognized him. He pulled up in a rental car, not fancy, but new, and when he stepped out, I had to do a double take. The kid who used to wear mud-stained jeans and flannel shirts was standing in front of me in a tailored charcoal suit with shoes that probably cost more than my entire monthly mortgage. His hair was cut differently. His posture was different. Even the way he walked was different, like he was constantly performing for an audience only he could see. "Logan!" Catherine rushed out and hugged him, and he hugged her back, but it was stiff. Formal. Like he was worried the city smell might come off on her clothes. I shook his hand instead of reaching for a hug. Something told me that's what he'd prefer. And he didn't correct me, so I was right. He was different in ways that went deeper than clothes and haircuts. When we'd sit down for dinner, Catherine had made his favorite meatloaf. He'd correct how I spoke. Not meanly, exactly, but with this tone like he was educating me. "Dad, you say ain't. Most successful people avoid that." Or he'd say something about my hands being too rough to shake clients with. Once, after a few drinks at dinner, he actually said, "You know, Dad, you're a good guy, but you just wouldn't understand city business. You're what they call a blue-collar, classic, I guess." Catherine's eyes got shiny when he said that, but she brushed it off and asked if he wanted more potatoes. I just kept eating. But something inside me broke just a little bit that night. I realized my son was ashamed of where he came from. Ashamed of me. The visits after that became less frequent. And when he did come home, the visits got shorter. He'd show up on a Saturday, spend a few hours looking uncomfortable in his expensive clothes, and then he'd get back in his rental car and disappear back to the city. Each time a little more distant. Each time a little less like the boy I knew. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn that distance was the only honest thing about my son's new life. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Gold-embossed lettering on thick cream cardstock. It was the kind of invitation that screams money, the kind that makes you nervous just holding it because you're afraid you might smudge it with your work-worn fingers. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Logan Hargrove and Miss Amanda Pierce," it read. Catherine held that invitation in her hands like it was made of glass. Tears started rolling down her face. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when you finally see something you've been hoping for. Her little boy was getting married. Her son was building a life. Maybe, she thought, maybe this would bring him back home in some way. Maybe marriage would ground him. Maybe Amanda, whoever she was, would help him remember where he came from. Me. I just looked at that invitation and felt something twist in my stomach. Hope and dread mixed together in a way I couldn't quite untangle. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Catherine spent hours in our kitchen baking her signature cookies, the ones she's been making since Logan was a kid. Snickerdoodles with extra cinnamon, the way he used to like them. She wrapped them in wax paper and tied them with a blue ribbon, and when I asked her why she was putting so much effort into cookies when there'd probably be a fancy caterer at this wedding, she just smiled and said, "So they'll know where his heart came from." I went to rent a suit. Drove to the only formal wear shop in our town, a place called Morton's Men's where that's been around since before I was born. The owner, Dale, he knows me, knows my work, knows my character. He helped me pick out a dark navy suit, nothing too fancy, but respectable. I got my shoes polished. I even practiced small talk in the mirror, trying to remember how to speak in a way that wouldn't embarrass Logan among all these city people. The night before the wedding, Catherine laid out our clothes on the bed and looked at me with this mix of excitement and worry. "You think he'll be happy to see us?" she asked. I told her of course he would be. "Your son gets married once in his life," I said. "He'd want his parents there. That's family." I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The drive to the estate where the wedding was being held took 3 hours. 3 hours of Catherine looking at the invitation and talking about how proud she was, how Logan must really have made something of himself to be able to afford an event at a place like this. The venue address had looked it up on my phone. It was a historic mansion with sprawling grounds and gardens. The kind of place that costs more money per hour than most people make in a week. When we pulled up to the gates, Catherine gasped. The property was massive. White roses lined the entrance. There were valets taking cars. Guests in designer clothes walked across marble patios. It looked like something out of a magazine, the kind of magazine I'd never actually read but had flipped through in a waiting room once. I looked at my wife, squeezed her hand, and told her we were going to have a good day. We were going to celebrate our son. We were going to be proud. I had no idea how wrong I was about to be proven. Logan found us before we even made it to our assigned seats. He appeared from nowhere, dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my first 3 cars combined, and he pulled me aside with a hand on my elbow. His jaw was tight. His smile was the fakest thing I've ever seen on his face, and I've seen him lie about his age to join a club when he was 17. "Dad," he said quietly, but with an edge, "please, try not to embarrass me today, okay? These are high-profile guests. Important people." I felt Catherine go rigid next to me. I wanted to say something like, "What could I possibly do that's more embarrassing than treating your own father like he's beneath you?" But I didn't. I was still the man who believed in giving people chances. So I just said, "I'm proud of you, son. You've built quite a life here." He sighed like I'd just said something stupid. "Yeah, well, let's just keep it classy, okay?" Then he walked off without waiting for an answer, leaving Catherine holding a box of homemade cookies like they were suddenly worthless. The ceremony was beautiful. I won't say it wasn't. Amanda, his bride, she looked radiant in her white dress. Her family sat in the front rows, and you could tell just by looking at them that they had money in ways my family never would. They dressed a certain way. They spoke measured and polished, like every word had been rehearsed. Amanda's father had a golf tan and wore a Rolex that probably cost what I make in a year. When the vows were exchanged, I felt Catherine relax a little. Love, even between 2 people you didn't fully know, was still a beautiful thing to witness. Logan and Amanda smiled at each other. For a moment, I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe my son had just been trying to find his place, and now with marriage, he'd have something real to anchor him. Then we moved to the reception. The space was massive, chandeliers everywhere, a dance floor that looked like it was made from polished glass, a band set up in the corner instead of a DJ like regular people have at weddings. Servers in white gloves moved between tables with trays of expensive-looking appetizers. Catherine sat beside me, and I could see her taking it all in, still holding those cookies like maybe at some point she'd figure out where to put them. The DJ, who wore a headset like he was controlling the space shuttle, called for quiet. He announced the toasts. Logan's best man went first, telling stories about business deals and nightclub adventures. Then came me. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ said into his headset, "please welcome Franklin Hargrove, father of the groom." I stood up. My palms felt like I dipped them in a bucket of water. Catherine squeezed my arm and gave me an encouraging nod. I walked to the small stage set up for speakers, took the microphone that was handed to me, and looked out at this sea of faces, hundreds of people, most of them strangers, all of them watching. I smiled at the crowd. I smiled at Amanda's family. And I began. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Franklin, Logan's father. I may not be. Dad, it's okay, you don't need to talk." His voice cut through mine like it was nothing. Like I was background noise. The whole room went quiet. I looked over and saw Logan leaning back in his chair, that fake smile on his face, gesturing like he was doing me a favor by stopping me. "We don't want to bore them with small-town stories," he continued, and several guests laughed. Laughed. Like he'd just made a hilarious joke at a comedy show. I stood there, frozen, still holding the microphone. "My dad's simple," Logan said, and his voice had this patronizing tone that I'd never heard before. Or maybe I had heard it, and I'd been choosing not to listen. "He's from the old days. We're a bit more modern now." Amanda laughed and squeezed his arm like he'd just said something incredibly charming. The room erupted. Not angry. Amused. Like my humiliation was the entertainment they'd been waiting for all evening. I looked at Catherine, and I saw her hand go to her mouth. I saw tears start to form in her eyes. And I saw her realize in that moment what I'd already started to understand, that her son, the boy she'd raised and sacrificed for, had become someone she didn't recognize. I could have thrown the microphone down. I could have walked off that stage shouting. I could have given these people a real show. But I didn't. I smiled instead. And that smile, the calm one, the knowing one, that's when everything shifted. That's when I made a decision that would change all of this forever. I walked off that stage slowly, set the microphone down on the table, took Catherine's hand, and led her back to our seats. People were still laughing and talking. The moment was already passing, already becoming just another funny story about someone's embarrassing dad. But I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about what my friend Miguel had told me 6 months back, about being hired as a set decorator for a company called Hargrove and Company. I was thinking about how he'd mentioned that the people in the office photos on their website were paid models. I was thinking about how I'd done some research after that and discovered that nothing, absolutely nothing, about my son's company was real. And I was thinking about how maybe, just maybe, the time had come to let the truth do what my words clearly couldn't. The night wasn't over yet. And my son was about to learn that sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is thinking your father doesn't know what you're really doing. The drive home was silent in a way that felt heavy. Catherine stared out the passenger window for the entire 3 hours, her hands still holding those cookies like they were the only real thing left of our son. I kept both hands on the wheel and didn't say much. What was there to say? We'd raised him. We'd sacrificed. And he'd repaid that by calling me simple in front of hundreds of strangers. When we got home, Catherine went straight to bed. I could hear her crying through the bedroom door, that quiet kind of crying where she didn't want me to know, but I knew anyway. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that I didn't drink, staring at nothing. My hands were shaking, but not from anger, from something worse. From disappointment so deep it felt like it was coming from my bones. Around 2 in the morning, I couldn't sleep. I walked to my office, the small room where I kept my computer, and filed away the work contracts for my business. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folder I'd been building for months without fully knowing why. I titled it Hargrove and Company on the tab. Inside were printouts, screenshots, digital receipts. Things I'd collected piece by piece after Miguel told me about being hired as a set decorator. I'd done some digging, just enough to confirm what I'd suspected. Now I spread them all across my desk and looked at them in the darkness of that early morning. There was the photo of Logan's corporate office from the magazine article he'd sent us. But I'd found the original listing. It was an empty warehouse that could be rented by the hour for photo shoots. There was the picture of his executive team, 6 people standing in professional poses. But when I'd reverse image searched them on the freelance modeling websites, I found their profiles. Every single one of them was available for hire at $60 an hour. There were the luxury vehicles from his Instagram. Rental confirmations, all from a leasing company that specialized in short-term photo shoot vehicles. And then there were the fake client contracts. Digital mock-ups, professionally designed, but with no real signatures. No real companies behind them. Just the illusion of success. Just smoke and mirrors dressed up in a tailored suit. My son wasn't a CEO. He was a performer in a one-man show where he was the only one who believed his own script. Catherine found me at dawn, still sitting at that desk, surrounded by papers that proved my son's entire life was a lie. She looked at the evidence without saying anything. Then she sat down next to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't do something you'll regret." But I just shook my head slowly. "This isn't anger talking, Kathy. This is something that needs to happen. Our son forgot who he is. Maybe it's time someone reminded him. The next 2 weeks were about investigation. Real investigation. The kind that takes patience and a clear head. I went through Logan's social media accounts with fresh eyes. Every photo. Every testimonial from satisfied clients. Every boast about his growing empire. And piece by piece, I pulled the threads. I called people. Casual conversations. I'd say I was thinking of investing in his company, wanted to learn more about his operations. That got me talking to people who'd been contacted by his firm. None of them had ever actually worked with him. None of them had signed contracts. They'd just been approached, impressed by the glossy presentations, then ghosted when they asked for details. I drove to the address listed as his company headquarters. It was a virtual office setup. You can rent a mailbox and use the address for business cards. His administrative assistant, that he always mentioned in interviews? I found her on a gig economy website. She worked for a service that answered phones and forwarded messages for 50 different companies just like his. The hardest part wasn't the investigation. It was accepting what I was finding. Every single element of Logan's success was rented, bought, or faked. He hadn't built anything. He'd just hired people to make it look like he had. I sat with that knowledge for days. Part of me wanted to let it go. Part of me wanted to just accept that my son had chosen a different path than the one I'd shown him, even if that path was built on quicksand. But then I'd think about him standing on that stage, mocking me in front of all those people. I'd think about the shame in Catherine's eyes. I'd think about how he'd been operating this con for years, fooling not just his parents but investors, journalists, and everyone else who wanted to believe in his story. And I'd think about something my father once told me. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is tell someone the truth, even when it hurts. One night, sitting in my truck on a job site, I called a private investigator I knew through the construction business. Gave him everything I'd found. Asked him to verify it. He called me back 2 days later and confirmed what I already knew. None of it was real. It was an elaborate fake. A beautiful lie with all the right components. That's when I made my decision. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of love for the person my son used to be, and hope that he could be that person again. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't call Logan or send him a threatening message. I just waited. Waited for the right moment. Waited for when his lies would be told in front of enough people that the truth would actually land. That moment came faster than I expected. About a week after the wedding, Amanda's family threw an after-party at their country club. Just the wedding party and close family. No press. No photographers. Just us. I wasn't planning to go. I was planning to stay home and let this all blow over. But Catherine looked at me over breakfast that morning and said something I couldn't ignore. He's still our son. Even if he doesn't act like it, even if he's forgotten who he is. Maybe he needs to remember. So I went. I wore the same rented suit. I didn't practice anything. I just walked in with Catherine and found a table where we could sit quietly. Logan saw us come in and his face went pale. He knew something was coming. Maybe he could feel it. Maybe he could sense that the ground beneath his carefully constructed empire was about to shift. The evening moved forward. People mingled. Drinks were poured. Amanda's father stood and made a speech about their family's legacy and their excitement about Logan joining it. Then, almost casually, someone asked Logan to tell the story of how he built his company. He stood up. That fake smile. That practiced swagger. And he began his speech about hard work and vision and disrupting the market and all the other buzzwords he'd learned somewhere along the way. I listened to every word. And then I did something I'd never done before. I stood up and calmly walked to where he was standing. I held out my hand, and he, confused, shook it. "That's a great story, son," I said quietly, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. "But I think there's another version everyone should know." I didn't wait for permission. I just started talking. "See, I've known Logan his whole life. And I watched him move to the city and decide that his old man wasn't good enough anymore. That his roots weren't sophisticated enough. That his hands were too rough, his speech too simple, his values too old-fashioned." I looked Logan in the eye. But what I never told him was that I was paying attention. That I knew about the rented office spaces, the paid actors posing as employees, the fake contracts, the leased luxury cars. The room went silent. Dead silent. Logan didn't build a company. He built an illusion. And he did it so well that he almost convinced himself it was real. I paused, let that sink in. His employees were hourly performers. His success was rented. His entire identity was a costume he paid for each month. Amanda's father stood up, his face flushing. Amanda looked at Logan like she was seeing him for the first time, and what she saw wasn't impressive. "I'm not here to destroy my son," I continued, and my voice was steady and clear. "I'm here because he forgot something important. Being low class isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. Being low class is about lying. It's about forgetting the people who lifted you. It's about choosing the illusion of respect over the reality of character." I looked at my son, and for the first time all evening, there was no performance in my expression. Just a father looking at his boy and telling him the truth. "You wanted to be more than your old man, Logan. But instead, you became less. And that breaks my heart more than any insult ever could." Then I took Catherine's hand and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Amanda asking questions. Could hear her father on his phone. Could hear the empire that Logan had spent years building begin to crumble in real time. The fallout happened faster than I expected it to. By the next morning, Amanda had filed for divorce. By the following day, every investor who'd been impressed by his fake success had pulled their money. News outlets that had featured him in articles about young entrepreneurs started digging into his background. What they found wasn't pretty. Hargrove and Company's social media went dark within 48 hours. His website disappeared. The fake office address stopped accepting mail. The virtual assistant service canceled his account. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in real time, except I wasn't watching from a distance. I was watching the aftermath unfold through phone calls and messages from people who felt duped. My phone started ringing. Reporters wanted to know if I had proof. Other clients of his claimed they'd been scammed. People who'd applied for jobs at his company but never got hired started comparing notes online and realizing they'd all been turned away from the same fake operation. The story made local news. Then it made regional news. Local man exposes son's elaborate corporate fraud at wedding reception. That was the headline. My face was on it. Logan's face was on it. And the entire truth, carefully documented and verified, was now public knowledge. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Catherine and I sat in our living room watching the news coverage, and she squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. But I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She loved our son too. This wasn't a win for her any more than it was for me. It was a loss. Just a necessary one. 2 weeks after the country club confrontation, Logan showed up at our house. No car this time. No suit. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and when he stepped out of the Uber, he looked like a ghost of himself. Like someone had hollowed him out and left just the shell standing on our porch. Catherine answered the door. I stayed in the kitchen, giving them space. I could hear her gasp. Could hear her voice crack when she said his name. And I could hear my son weeping in my wife's arms like a child who'd finally come home. I stepped into the living room, and Logan looked at me with eyes that had finally seen the truth. "Dad," he whispered, "I messed up. I messed up everything." I didn't hug him right away. I just sat down and looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. This wasn't the performer. This wasn't the man in the tailored suit trying to impress city people. This was just Logan. Broken. Humbled. Real. "You did," I said simply. "You built something on nothing and called it success. You forgot where you came from and called it growth. And you hurt your mother and me and called it ambition." He flinched with each word, but he didn't look away. He sat down on the edge of the couch like he wasn't sure he deserved to actually sit on it. Catherine sat next to me, her hand finding mine. "I don't know how to fix this," Logan said quietly. "You start by understanding what went wrong," I told him. "It wasn't the fake company. It wasn't even the lies to other people. It was the lie you told yourself. You believed that who you actually were wasn't good enough. You believed that success meant erasing your past instead of building on it." I leaned back and took a breath. "Your mother and I, we didn't have much. But we had integrity. We had character. Those are the things that matter when everything else falls apart. Those are the things you tried to purchase instead of earn." Catherine reached over and touched Logan's face gently. "We never thought you were low class," she said, and her voice was soft but firm. "We never thought you needed to be anything other than our son." We talked for hours that night. Real talk. The kind where Logan actually listened instead of performing. He told us about the pressure he'd felt to be successful in the city. About how everyone around him seemed to have more, do more, be more. About how he'd gotten caught in a spiral where the illusion became more important than the reality. By the time he left, and he did leave, saying he needed to face what he'd done and figure out how to rebuild, something had shifted. Not forgiven. Not fixed. But honest. And honestly broken is sometimes the only way to honestly heal. It took months. Real months. Logan faced lawsuits from people who felt scammed. He had to sell his apartment to settle some of the claims. He went back to school, started working a real job at the ground level of a real company, and actually earned his way up for the first time in his life. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't impressive. But it was real. And here's what I learned from all of this, the thing I need you to understand. Success built on lies is never actually success. It's just postponed failure. But character, real, grounded, honest character, that's the only thing that actually matters when the rest of the world falls away. My son called me low class, because he'd forgotten that class isn't about how much money you have or what suit you're wearing. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. It's about the promises you keep to yourself and to the people who love you. If you've ever felt looked down on for where you come from, remember this story. Remember that your worth isn't in what you own or who you pretend to be. Your worth is in who you actually are. Subscribe to this channel right now so you don't miss the next story. And trust me, we have stories. Turn on those notifications because there's a new tale of family, betrayal, justice, and redemption coming soon that you won't want to miss. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us your story. Have you ever had to expose someone you love for the truth? Have you ever felt what Franklin felt? Let's talk about it. Share this with someone who needs to hear that real success is built on character, not illusion. Because the world needs more people like you who believe that truth matters. Family is everything, but family built on honesty is everything that lasts.